Gwich'in, the G, the Ona Tanshik, which is neat, the no chill, chicken chick to go, and I've tried to fetch the chicken chick to go here. That's also none, the chan touch when I wish it taken, who not go, and I'll try it, and don't, and a fucking chick to go here. Nancy the Gunjo. You read the Bashi. You read the Bashi. Gwich'in. Showingly. This is what it was like for us when we walked into the residential school. For me, it was in 1955 when I went to All Saints Catholic School. I walked into the classroom, into All Saints School. All I heard was English. I didn't know a word of English, but that's getting ahead of my story. Slide. This is where it all began. It's on the Peel River that flows into the Mackenzie. How many of you know where the Mackenzie is? Good for you. The Peel River flows into the Mackenzie, and this is a place called Road River. It's right inside the NWTU border, and this is where I was raised for the first 8 years of my life, immersed in the language, the culture, the love, the sharing, the hugs. Everything I did, I was praised. Anything I learned, I was encouraged to learn more. This is where it happened. The winter and fall camp, just across the river from there was the spring camp, and 3 kilometers up was our summer camp, and that's where our parents raised us. I was in balance. How many of you are in balance? Physically, mentally, spiritually, psychologically, 100%. That's where I came from at the age of 8. When I walked into that residential school, I was a failure already because I didn't understand English. I was punished because I didn't understand English. I didn't like the food. I didn't like the smell of the place. They took all my clothes away from me. They gave me clothing that smelled different. It was what you would call today traumatic. And that wasn't the only trauma we experienced. The trauma of different foods, the trauma of rules, the trauma of being in a little box, couldn't get out. Oh, there was times when I wanted to cry, and I couldn't cry. I shut down. The seasonal camps happened there, spring, summer, winter, fall. Summers were the best, because for 12 years I was in residential school. Every summer, my mom and dad would take us back up there. Thank God my mother never spoke English. Thank God she knew all her skills. She taught us everything. She taught us teamwork. She taught us how to forgive and to get on with our life. We had a lot of forgiving to do. But again, I'm getting to the head of my story. My parents had 14 children, 12 surviving. 2 died in infancy. So there were 12 of us, and every one of us was taken away one by one. There she is, and now you know why I'm dressed the way I do today. I paid tribute to Mama Bella Charlie, and I have to. Because you know, when I did a presentation to teachers one year in Inuvik, had the same outfit on. I said, "Isn't she beautiful?" My mother never spoke English, but she taught us all the traditional skills. During my 12 years, I became ashamed of who I was. I was ashamed of my parents, ashamed of the kind of life they lived. Because at the residential school we showered, we had everything according to schedule. That day when I gave my presentation, all of a sudden I said, "Sorry, Mom and Dad. I asked for your forgiveness for being ashamed of you." So I made my peace with them. My mom and dad, my first teachers, the best teachers. Because you know what my dad said? Forgive and forget. That was ingrained in our lives. She taught us everything she could on the land. And my dad taught us to pray. To pray. And that was one of the AA members said to me, "Oh, by the way, 42 years sober this year." Alcohol and drugs affected our life, but it wasn't for nothing. I urge all of you to buy this book. Thank goodness for Rupert Ross, who worked as a prosecutor here in Ontario for many years. He finally found out when he retired why so many of our people were silent. And our people are silent because our voices were taken away. We were robots. We had no feelings. We couldn't cry. All because of the residential school. I'll get into that. Slide, please. John A. Tadlichi went to Hay River for 3 years. 3 straight years, never came home. He lived to be 66. He was the first Dene Aboriginal person to be appointed to the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories. What a wonderful father. He mentored me from a very young age. I remember coming home from residential school and we were having a feast. And I'm sitting there beside my mom and he says, "Sarah, I want you to get up and interpret what I'm going to say in Gwich'in." And I'm sitting there shaking, look at my mother, hoping she would say, "Oh, don't let her do that." But she didn't even look at me, so I had to get up. He knew I had the leadership skills. But you know what, at residential school, if I spoke up, I was a troublemaker. But I had leadership skills. Isn't that wonderful? We need that. He taught me. He taught me to stand up and speak. He introduced me to the rest of the Legislative Assembly members. He got me to travel with them. I was so shy. I'd walk downtown in Fort McPherson, I couldn't look at anybody, my head was down. If I saw somebody coming, I'd say, "Please don't say hello to me." That's how shy I was. Anyways, he became the chief of Fort McPherson. And he really questioned the Legislative Assembly members. Some of them were lawyers from across Canada. Hugh H. Campbell from Ottawa, there was somebody from Saskatchewan, another professor at the University of Saskatchewan, were all sitting out the ledge, and he used to get them stumped with his questions. But a wonderful father that taught us so much to share, care, love, forgive. Next slide, please. She was the one that passed at 106. My mom's mother. And this was the spring I was married, 1974. Mom died in January. I got married in April. November 11th, I quit drinking. December I quit smoking. So can you imagine what my poor body went through? Mentally, I hadn't even recognized what had happened to me. Physically, I was trying to get rid of the alcohol. I was going through withdrawals big time. Thank God that I was able to sober up. Poor turkey. He wanted to educate his children, 12 of them, my late dad. So he made sure all of us went to school. I went to University of Saskatchewan in 72, 73. And I had received a letter in April of that year, and it says, please take a year off, because I had failed all my courses. I was partying. I was having a good time, I thought. So I went away feeling I was a failure. I'm not university material. I'm not going back there. And so my inferiority complex just went all around me. I had no self-confidence. I was fat, I was ugly, I was all the negative things you could think of. Not once did anybody come up and say to me, oh my God, are you ever beautiful? You're good looking. You've got a beautiful body. Nobody ever said that to me. I left that residential school as a robot. No feelings, no voice. Couldn't cry. Couldn't give compliments. I couldn't even hug anybody. Never mind saying I love you. I couldn't love anybody. I couldn't trust anybody because of what happened in the residential school. In 1984, I had my youngest son. I have 5 children and I have 12 grandchildren. My oldest grandson is 18 and the youngest are twin girls. And they're going to turn 1 next month. But when I was having my youngest son, I had him in July, April of that year, I woke up one morning, I came staggering down the stairs in my log house and I was wondering what was going on. Here I had lost my hearing in my left ear. When I went to the health center, the doctor said, oh, that's common, it'll come back. A year later, I was finally sent to Edmonton to get it checked out, and there was nothing they could do. But life goes on. From that moment on, I thought, oh, and I went to the health center, the nurse said, the doctor says you're going to eventually lose your hearing in your other ear. And I said, no way. No way. I said, I have things to do. I have to go back to school. I got to teach the language. And I walked away from there and I thought, no, people don't have to know I'm hearing impaired. I don't want them to feel sorry for me. And I just got on with my life. My grandfather on my dad's side. Next slide, please. My grandfather is on the far right with his wife Alice. Never did meet her. But my grandfather Alfred Tredledge, was deaf. He was hearing impaired. And I always remember wherever he was, people had to yell into his ears for him to hear what was being said. So I had an uncle who came to me when I lost my hearing. And he asked me if I did lose my hearing, and I said, yes. Somebody has to take after Gigi, I said. And my sense of humor kept me going. Our sense of humor kept us going in the residential school, even though we were forbidden to speak our language. We still did it behind closed doors. We still did it out on the playground. Anyway, hearing impaired, I finally had to get a hearing aid when I went back to the University of Saskatchewan in 1989. I went back with 4 of my children, ages 3, 8, 10, and 12. My husband decided to stay up north so he could make extra money for us. So he did. Anyways, that was 14 years after I was asked to leave the university. And my perspective at that time was, I'm going to go back to university. And if I fail, so be it. So be it. Just means that I'm not university material. But if I pass, more power to me, eh? So I went with that perspective. And I did pass. I got my BA. But you know, there's challenges all the time. I was doing my intercession course. I had just finished, and I had one more course to do in July to get my Bachelor of Education. And so when I finished intercession on Friday, we took the kids out in Saskatoon, took them out on the bus, did some shopping. We were going to take them back to Edmonton, and my husband was going to go back up north with them. Meanwhile, I was going to head back to the University of Saskatchewan to do my last course. We get home that night, we got a phone call. My youngest brother had committed suicide. And I said to myself, these are the challenges we face. These are the obstacles that come up when we're trying to do something for ourselves. So I went home, we put my brother to rest, and then I went back to the summer school to get my last course. I got it. I got it. I spent 2 years in a Catholic all-saints school. And when I think back to my residential school years, those 2 years are the ones that always come back. Because we left the end of August, never came home till the end of June. Never saw my mom and dad, never saw my grandparents. Remember that beautiful setting at Road River where I was surrounded by the language, the culture, walking on snowshoes with my grandmother to check snares, you know, setting traps with my mom. I even had a dog team. Before the age of 8, I had a dog team. And you know, I consider that a PhD, according to our standards, because I knew everything about survival on the land. But when I got into the residential school, all I saw was red X's telling me I was a failure. You're wrong. You're not right. You're an Indian. We're going to erase that out of you. So that was the start of my anger, my resentment, my hatred towards a dominant society that came in as our supervisors, as our teachers. Mind you, there were a few good ones in there that really inspired us. I have another book in that bag there. And I talk about not having any emotions at all. Rupert Ross, Indigenous Healing, on page 132. You know, when I started reading this book, it's about Aboriginal people, First Nations across Canada, and specifically in Ontario. The way he wrote this book what really touched my heart, because our people, a lot of our people have not even started their healing. For some people, the truth and reconciliation, the TRC, opened a can of worms for some of our people. Some of our people said, no way, I'm not going to go there, I'm not going to go back there, it's too painful. They won't even touch it with a 10-foot pole. But you know, I was the principal of Chief Julia's School in Fort McPherson, and one of our leaders came down here for treatment at Bellwood, and a guy, I don't know if any of you know him, but Doug Smith will ever be engraved in my mind. Doug Smith, a psychologist, came up to Total Healing and started working with us, with families, with leaders. Oh, was he brutal. was he ever brutal. He just got us to deal with every issue we had in our life. He said, we're not here to deal with the drugs and alcohol. He said, we're here to deal with your history and residential school. And that's what we did. But you know, I went there and I thought, no way am I ever going to break down with that guy. He's not going to make me cry. That's the attitude I went in with, because I was so controlling, so angry. Anyways, we get in there, and as soon as Doc Smith sat across from you, you knew it was your day. So that day when Doc walked in, I looked across, I thought, oh no. The first question he asked me, he had me in tears. He had me in tears, not even 3 minutes, he had me in tears. And here I'm saying that I don't cry. But I was ready. I was ready to deal with that residential school and what it did to me. I wanted to get rid of that anger and resentment and prejudice that I had against this non-dominant staff, non-Aboriginal staff that came to work for me, because after all I was a principal, and I had to be a model. So I had to become colorblind, like right now. And he helped me. He gave me all the tools to help me to realize that it wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. It was the church and the people that they hired, you know. It was way back then. You people here some of you don't even know anything about the residential school. You see homeless people across Canada on skid rows. And I've always said that's what the media likes to focus on. It's the people that are drunk on drugs, homeless. They don't focus on these young folks here that are, some of them are going to university, some of them are in high school. They don't focus on our successes. Drunken Indian, that's what they focus on. But we're not all drunks. There's some of us that are very healthy, that have worked all our lives to try to heal our community, to help our people, to make them realize what happened to them. And I just wanted to read this. These are some of the people that Rupert had talked to, and these are the comments. We weren't allowed to cry because we were taught that way. It was really, really hard to cry or even laugh. When we look at Aboriginal people, because of their history, it is like they don't talk about their feelings. We can't. It was too painful. You know, I have a brother. A couple years ago, he said, I was a happy drunk for 40 years. Not once during that time did me or my peer groups ever talk about the residential school. My brother's been sober since 1992 now and working as a support worker for residential schools today. I had built this wall around me all over ever since I was small. I wouldn't allow anybody into that space of mine. I think it was really hard to take that risk and letting that down and letting people in. It got so bad, my friends, that when I met my husband, my dear loving husband who has supported me 100% and supported everything I did, when we met, he finally rehearsed how he was going to propose to me. And he did. He asked me to marry him. You know what I said? For how long? He said, till we're 60. I said, okay. And I visualized people, all of you, if you men have proposed, knelt down and offered the ring to your fiancé, happy occasion, I mean, all I said was, okay, and walked away, not even a hug. I didn't know how. I didn't want to get too close to another individual. I didn't want to get hurt again. It's very hard for me to say I love you to my husband. I say it to my children, my grandchildren, but not to my husband. Because my husband went through the residential school. He went through all that abuse. And he doesn't know how to talk. I talk to him. Okay, do what you have to do. So I do. I had always shielded myself from other things that had happened. So for me, that was one of the biggest things, letting go of that shield. Not a shield, it was an armor so thick, nobody could get in. A lot of times I might be having a feeling and not really know where it came from. Something present may have triggered in my life, but when I look back, it was, a mood swirl a lot deeper. So starting to really look and find the first time that pain was planted and was buried. And we buried that pain. We buried those emotions. And that wall was there. So when Smith came up to Dundee, I said, and it was just about that time that the Berlin Wall was coming down. People were chopping away at the Berlin Wall, and I said to Dad, oh my God, what a coincidence, eh? Here you're trying to chop away at the Gwich'in walls that we have up here, And it was a lot of work. It was very painful work, very painful. Anyways, I went to residential school to Clavik for 2 years. I went to Fort McPherson for 6 years in residential school. In Newvik High School for 4 years. 12 years of my life, I was in residential school. They really trained me well. Really. But you know what? When you're in there from a very young age, you get to read attitudes. You get to read body language, tone of voice. And so throughout my work, when a new teacher walked in, I would look at that person and think, oh yeah, I'll be able to work with Derek. Comes right into the gym, take inventory of all the gym equipment, started working. But when Doug came in that day to work with us, and we started talking, Derek sat there and he cried and he cried and he cried. And I went up to him and I said, what's the matter, Derek? He said, high school was the best time of my life. I didn't know all you people went through this. I said, well, now you know. Take that message with you and start educating your counterparts across Canada. Because we need your help, every one of you in here that don't know about the residential school. Thank you. I don't know your name, but what you shared with me yesterday touched my heart. I've never ever heard anybody say that before. Thank you. You're gonna help us. Anyways, 12 years in the residential school. I was going to graduate next year, and I went home for Christmas. And we were at a feast and dance, and my dad was a chief. And he had gotten all this caribou up at Road River for the New Year's feast. So we were at the dance, and he said, I'd like to ask some of the boys to go up to Road River and pick up this meat, because the men usually do the New Year's feast. We do the Boxing Day feast, the women. But when the men do the New Year's feast, we do the cooking. That's just the way it is. Anyways, my sister and I were going to go up. I said, let's go up to Road River and get that meat. And she said, you? Having been in residential school all these years, going to drive a dog team? I said, oh yeah, I am. And so I went with her. I had a dog team of 5. We went up. We camped on the way to Road River, and the next day we got there about 2 in the afternoon. And I go to that door and I'm feeling around inside the door and my sister says, Sarah, what are you doing? I said, I'm looking for the light switch. 50 miles outside of town, I'm looking for a light switch in the cabin. Oh, she was not happy with me, but that's what the residential school did to us. Anyways, 1974, 73 was when I went home and I decided now is the time to spend time with my mom and dad and relearn all that traditional way. Relearn because I already knew it, so I had to go home and relearn it. So I went back to Road River. Things were not the same. My mom wasn't getting up in the daytime and she wasn't doing the things that she normally does. Somebody brought in a moose that sat there and I'm wondering what's going on. There was a shell oil camp just above the river. They came down with a chopper and they picked her up. I had just gone into Inuvik before that too, and so when I heard Mom was in the hospital, I went up there. I walked into the hospital and her bed was there. And I was standing at the foot of the bed. And she says, excuse me, I'm going to be going to Edmonton for further tests to find out what's going on with me. The doctors didn't know what was going on. And mind you, 12 of her children were taken away, right from in the mid-1940s right up to the 60s. 12 of her children were every year taken away. I walked in and she says, I'm going to Edmonton. I said, oh, Mom, I said, you're going to be home for Christmas. And she said, I don't think so. I don't think so. I so wanted to hug my mom. I so wanted to go and say, I love you, Mom. Give her a hug. But I didn't know how. I never had that contact. So I just stood there. The next time I saw my mom, they brought her home in a coffin in January. Today, I learned to hug the elders. I learned to hug the mothers and the fathers. Learning to say, I love you. Because we couldn't love anybody. How could you love somebody after 12 years in that institution? So Mom left us. But she left a lot of her teachings with us. She left so much. When I started relearning my language, I could hear her. I could hear her pronounce those words. My dad, same thing. So when I decided to go back to university in 1987, I did it because I was sitting on the District Education Authority and I kept talking about it. I was doing community reports in my language on CBC and it just seemed like nobody heard me. So I thought, okay, Freddie, I'm going back to university. I said to him and he said, no problem, go. So away I went. People were watching me. There were other women that were watching me, waiting for me to fail, waiting for me to come home and say I gave up. I got on the plane in Nuvik with 4 of my children. My youngest was 3. And we landed in Norman Wells. We took off to Yellowknife. And he turned to me, he said, Mom, when we're going to go back and see Dad? And I looked at him and I was ready to cry. I said, Jimmy, don't ever say that again. I said, we're going to be in Saskatoon all year and your dad's going to stay behind. We'll pray for him. We'll pray for him. Okay, he said, that was the first and last time he ever said that about his dad. Thank God. So I went back. People were watching me. I knew that, so I really had to work hard. when I graduated, I was in a Native Studies class, and the professor said, I would like you to do a paper on someone that really inspired you in your life. And Granny Annie G. Robert had just passed away in January of '87, and I had gone back to school in September. So I thought, oh my God, time for me to come to terms with my granny's death. So I went into the library. I had 2 classes on the Thursday. I went in between the 2 classes. I couldn't write fast enough. These thoughts were just coming. I was writing as fast as I could. The next class came, so I went to that. After that finished, I went back into the library and I kept writing. And I wrote a 10-page story of Granny. And it's called Writing the Circle. And it was published in there. It's called Granny. And I wrote a story of my grandmother, Juju Annie G. Robert, and what she did for our family. Just powerful. Anyways, I submitted the paper, and Professor Jolly said, Sarah, would you read this at our next class? I said, no way. No, not going to do it. She said, why? I said, because as soon, even when I read it now, I said, I'm in tears. I'm in tears. She said, is it okay if I read it? I said, please read it. So there must have been about 75 people in that class, all walked. She started reading that story. You could hear a pin drop. Half, if more than half of that class was in tears. And when she finished reading it, she never said a word, she just stood there. Slowly people started getting up and walking out. Not a comment from anybody. Everybody walked out. It was just too powerful. And years later, when I still read it, I get very emotional because Juju Annie had such a big influence on my life. I became the principal of Chief Julius when I graduated. Well, actually, I taught for a while, but because of my hearing, I had to step down as a teacher, and I applied as a principalship. So I got that in January of 1993. And then I moved to Clavic for a year. Then the assistant director position came up in Inuvik. My friend Colleen Gordon was the director or superintendent. And she phoned me and said, Sarah, would you apply for that job? I said, are you kidding? I'll never ever be able to do the job as good as you. She said, you'll never do the job as good as me, but you'll do it the best that Sir Jerome can do it. My application went in right then and there, and I was successful. I worked in that capacity for 10 years. Very good experience for me. I met a lot of people. I learned to forgive. I learned to forget. Became really good friends with some of the staff. I do presentations to school staff in Yellowknife, in Inuvik, and my family have never heard me do this presentation. My daughter was there, my sister, one of my very good friends, and they were sitting right in the front row when I talked about my mom not being able to say goodbye. And all of them, that whole room was not a dry eye in that gym. My daughter never ever made a comment to me about that presentation. You see what I mean? Intergenerational effects. Our kids can't even talk to us sometimes about these things. It's so painful. When I started hugging my kids, I said to them, when we're together, we need to hug each other and say we love each other. But what if we're in a public setting? What if we're out in the public, I'm at a dance and I look at you and I want to know if you're doing okay, if you love me, how could we show? And they said, Mom, we'll wink at each other. So that's what we did. We had to work on it. You know, 1974 I sobered up. 1985 I finally went for healing. But jeepers sakes, I forgot I was going to have Jimmy. I was pregnant. And I came across a book by Dr. Dyer. How many of you are familiar with Dr. Dyer? He does a lot of talks on TV about healing, about changing your life. Anyways, I'm okay, you're okay. That was the title of his book, and I happened to get a copy of that book, and I started reading it. And I got up one morning, and I thought, I don't really give a hoot what anybody thinks. I'm okay. And that was a big statement for me. Because remember, I was fat, I was ugly, I was all those negative things, eh? Boy, did I ever feel good. It just seemed like a whole load had lifted off me. And that's when I started talking about going back to school. Because finally I had confidence in me and who I was. I was beautiful, even though nobody told me. And even when my husband said that to me, I used to just shrug it off. I couldn't accept compliments. It just wasn't something that we were accustomed to. So anyways, I apologized to my mom and dad. And when I did that, it was for all the parents of residential school. Anyways, I always used to wonder about the parents. How did our parents feel when all of a sudden, the end of August, all these kids would disappear? So I went to my sister-in-law one day and I said, how do you think our parents felt? It was really a coincidence that I should ask her, because she said, you know what? I wanted to find out. So one weekend she said, I decided to go home and ask my dad. There must have been some sort of communication going on. Our drive from Inuvik to Fort McPherson is about 2 hours. She gets home, goes in the door. Dad! She saw her dad sitting on a couch. Dad! Why? She said to him. That's all she said. He started crying. She started crying. They both cried and cried and cried. And then the father said, you don't know. You don't know what we went through when our kids were taken away. I went out in the bush. After they took you away, I went out in the bush. I yelled and I screamed my head off. I couldn't do anything else. That's when I found out. When my mom when I was going to spend that year with my mom at the Road River, I was sitting on that bench on the river bank. I said to her, after all the kids had gone back to school, I said, Mom, I said, how did you do it? How? You've got 12 of your kids who were taken away. And she said, I had no choice. I had no choice. And 6 of us girls, then there was a boy, and my brother was just the apple of my mom's eye. 6 of us girls. So we were treated like boys. We went out and cut logs with my dad. We got wood with him. Shell oil was in the vicinity. They needed these 45-gallon barrels taken up the river, so there was me and my dad rolling these 45s in a boat. So if you think I'm fragile, you should see me out in the bush. 6 of us girls. He treated us like boys, and we worked like boys. So when I have to dress up for an occasion, I really feel uncomfortable, because I'm always used to working out on the land. Anyways, I finally retired in 2007 from my teaching, from the assistant superintendent. My sister had just battling cancer for 14 years, and just prior to her death, she said, Sarah, get out of that job. It's too stressful. You don't need that. So I said, okay, I'm out of here. So I retired. 2009, my daughter walked into me and said, Mom, there's a position out in Yellowknife. It's the Languages Commissioner of the Northwest Territories. I said, so? Oh, just thought I'd let you know, she said. So of course I put in my application, just to see what would happen. And I said, if I get an interview, that would be good. That would be more skills and more learning for me. So I did. So I was up the river doing on the land program with my husband with high school students, and just in March. And I get a call from the Legislative Assembly telling me to come down to Yellowknife for an interview. So I said, okay. So they made arrangements for me. And if I'm correct on this, anytime they hire contractors to work for them, the government, they invite them in, they give them time to check into the hotel, freshen up, maybe a day or so they're doing their interview. I remember this lady said, get to the airport, bring your luggage right to the ledge. I said, why? Because you're having your interview right then and there. And I thought, oh my God, I don't even have time to change or put on my makeup or whatever. But I go over there. Speaker of the House, the clerk of the council, and 3 other members were there, all men. I walk in and I said, where's the woman red? And they said, what you talking about? I said, you guys are ganging up on me. I said, there's supposed to be a woman present here. And they started laughing. But I sat down. I made myself feel comfortable by saying that. So we went into the interview. And I went through my language act. I highlighted everything. I tried to memorize. Not one question from that language act. It was very informal. I was really surprised. And I just felt like, jeepers, if I get this job, it just seems like I didn't deserve it because they didn't refer to the Language Act. But anyways, they're talking and they're asking me questions. And then the clerk of the council said, Sarah, if you're successful, would you move to Yellowknife? And I looked at him and I said, if I'm successful at this job, I'm not moving to Yellowknife. I got a house to maintain in Inuvik. I don't have monies to rent a place or whatever. And so he looks at the speaker and he says, well, Mr. Delory, should we move the office to Inuvik? I knew I had the job. Right then and there. So they moved the office to Inuvik. And I worked out at the Capitol Suites for 4 years. Traveled all over, learned so much. Did a lot of acts in the 9 Aboriginal languages, plus English and French. So it was a good 4 years. Anyways, two people, well actually my parents, my grandparents really inspired me. My dad really believed in education. He had only grade 3, so he really encouraged all of us to get out there and get our education and work for our people. But back in the 60s, there was a principal that came to Fort McPherson. He was from Newfoundland. O.G. Tucker, the love of our life. He just got right out there. He got in the community. He had a big loudspeaker on top of his house and he would play music for us. Had us singing until we lifted the roof off the school. Just a wonderful guy. He believed in us. He was one of the first educators who made me believe in me and inspired me that I could do anything I wanted to do. And when I graduated from Stringer Hall, grade 12, there was a matron there that I went to her and I said, could you sign my yearbook? And what I read in there was, here's to a college degree and all the prestige that goes with it. Oh my God, can you just imagine what that did for me? That was in the files of my computer forever. And I knew I could do it. I thank those two people today because I have a B.Ed now. I have a Bachelor of Education. And I also have a PhD on the land skills. When I went to the Dundee healing, back in balance, physically, mentally, spiritually, psychologically, I was healing. I was learning to get rid of that hate. And when I walked out of that school in Stringer Hall, I walked out with a rage. It wasn't hate, it was rage. I was ready to kill. And so many of our people do that today. You read it all the time in the news. It's because they don't know how to deal with that part of their life and to let go and to forgive. So next time you see a homeless person down there, First Nations, you'll understand where they're coming from. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't even know how to begin to heal. And if you say, leave it in the Creator's hands, they'll say, what Creator? They hired the staff to look after the RC school and Anglican school where the students were eventually fighting one another. Relatives were fighting each other. They don't have nothing to do with religion. But you know what we call it? Spirituality. Respect for the land, for the animals, for each other. That's how we're teaching it now in our day curriculum, in our schools. So I quit blaming. I went to the TRC meeting in Vancouver, and there was a very distinguished elder that got up there, and she said, change your story. Change your story. Let go of that anger. Let go of that resentment. Change your story. And sometimes I get really carried away, like I did yesterday when I was talking about my friend Emma's Nadu. And I do that because so many of our people still don't have their voices. And I speak on behalf of them. I speak on behalf of my mum and dad, my Gigi Alfred and Stu Alice, Stu Annie G. Robert, who lived to be 106. They never knew what we went through. And you know, even though some of these students went home and said the priests and the nuns are abusing us sexually, physically, the parents said, don't say that about these people that are working for God. Only now I think they're finding out. And I used to wonder why all these good-looking boys never paid attention to me in high school. How come they don't even ask us to go for coffee? Because they were all sexually abused. And you try to go up and hug them, they're just rigid. That's a story of our life. That's where we came from. We're trying to heal. While I was sobering up, people were coming to me and wanting me to try to help them while I was still sick. When Doug Smith came up, he went to a Klavik, he came up to Fort McPherson and he said, oh, Sarah, he said, after what I heard in those two communities, I had to call my psychologist. You call your psychologist? I said to him, what about us? All those years that while we're healing, we're trying to heal our own people. Don't tell me about psychology. I was so upset at him. But look at how immense that hurt was. He knew, we call him the dangerous man. Whenever he came along, oh, here comes that dangerous man, we better get out of here. because every time he came around, he questioned us, and before we knew it, we were crying. We didn't want to cry. We never knew how to cry, so we didn't want anybody to see us cry. We were ashamed to cry. One year I never cried for 2 years, and I bragged about it. Now we have to start getting our emotions back. Start saying, I love you. You're not too bad, you know, you guys. All of you. You're all going to help us out. You're going to pass that message on for us. You're going to share it with people you work with, your students, your family. And let them know that we are on our healing path, as painful as it is. And we've lost a lot of our students that went away to residential school and never came home. My dad's uncle went down to River. Nobody talked about it. My father died in 1983 with a massive heart attack out at our camp. My Uncle Johnny passed away with cancer. After that, that was 1997, after that we found out that their uncle who had gone to River ended up around Fort Resolution and married, and we had relatives down there. The Jeromes went to school with us in the Kitchell Hall. And if one of us had even gone out with one of those boys there, we were going out with our cousins. We didn't know. But we found out. Very distinguished looking men, the Tedlechis. Very distinguished. And people keep telling me that, you know, an elder said, even the way you walk shows how much pride you have in yourself. But being hearing impaired, one of the things I thought was, at least now I can identify with the elders, how they're feeling. But it's really frustrating because starting in September, my hearing started going down. So I'm talking to my little grandson. I can't hear what he's saying because my hearing gets very distorted some days. Jason, I can't hear you. So he comes right up to my ears and he whispers in my ear. So things like that happen that keep our humor up. We have to have our humor. It was the humor that kept us alive, that kept us resilient to survive and to talk about this today. When I was thinking about talking last night, I was just thinking to myself, oh my God, I don't want to cry. I don't want to cry. And just before I came in there, I said a prayer that I will tell my story positively and show that the residential school gave me an education. It gave me an education. It made me aware of the dominant society. And like old William Nurse, who said, you know, Sarah, he said, you have your one foot in both cultures. You speak English, you speak Gwich'in. Educated than I am, because he said, I only speak my Gwich'in language. I really took that as a compliment. My education now is being used to teach on the land skills, to teach a language, to help these young people here however way I can, to make them proud to be Gwich'in. Slide. And this is me after I finish the Gwich'in healing. 100%, physically, mentally, spiritually, psychologically, I was on my way to healing. And they told us to dress the way we felt or the way we wanted to be seen. That was me. 1992, my husband wanted to renew our vows. So I said, okay. I had a dress made, a belt, a headband. So I used that day to show that I was happily on my way to healing. And I hope that I have not offended any one of you in my presentation today. I hope that you will keep an open mind take my story and feel free to share it. Feel free to use my name because I'm already covered. I'm protected. And I want people to know where I came from, that I survived 12 years. 12 years in the residential school. Thank you so much. And if you have questions, you have to write it down because I can't hear that well.